What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, and if you're ready, it's time to talk about some playoff hockey. So the first round matchups are set for the 2015 NHL Stanley Cup Playoffs. It is the best time of year, the singular best time of year to be a sports fan, in particular a hockey fan, and we are smack dab in the middle of it, and we're about to get started. Playoffs begin on Wednesday, I believe it is. We have some just phenomenal matchups in the first round. Better than I could have predicted, better than I predicted about a month ago, although I did go 4 for 4 on the division winners. So same deal as last year. We're going to do an Eastern Conference video and a Western Conference video. There's 4 matchups in each conference, so it kind of deserves its own video. So after you watch this one, make sure you pop over and watch the other conferences video as well. Let's get going. So I believe it's appropriate for us to begin in the Eastern Conference with the President's Trophy winning team. That is the New York Rangers, the winners, of course, of the Metropolitan Division and the holders of the best record in the NHL this year. They are going to be playing host to the Pittsburgh Penguins, who fought their way into the Wild Card 2 spot on the last day of the season. Rangers this season were 53-29 straight up wins and losses, 113 points, 252 goals for, and only 192 goals against. Anytime you have a full season and hit under 200 goals against, you've had a good defensive year. Pittsburgh, to their credit, 43-39 this year, 498 points, 221 and 210. Season series here was tilted pretty heavily in the Rangers' favor. Rangers were 3-0-1 against Pittsburgh this year, outscoring the Penguins 16-8. Now the average game between these two teams is going to look a little bit like this. The Rangers averaged better than 3 goals per game this year at 3.07. Pittsburgh, to their credit, averaged about 2.7. While Pittsburgh only gave up 2.56 goals against per game this year, the Rangers had a very impressive 2.34 goals against per game average on the season. This all averages out to about a 0.3 goals per game advantage for New York. In New York this year, the Rangers were 25-16 on home ice, very good record, while Pittsburgh actually had a sub-500 road record this year, straight up wins and losses, at 20-21. Pittsburgh, again, to their credit, 23-18 on home ice. They got the job done there, but the Rangers had the NHL's best road record this year. 28 road wins. That is phenomenal to just 13 road losses. Good enough for the best mark in the league. Biggest X factor I see here for the Rangers, this team's got 2 really good goaltenders. I mean, Cam Talbot filled in really admirably for Henrik Lundqvist when he was out with his issue. And of course, Lundqvist over the past 5-6 years has been one of the elite goaltenders in all of hockey across the world. The question is, do they go with the king, who is a proven commodity, or do they go with the kid, who has played very admirably for them this season? Biggest X factor here that I see for the Penguins have to win the special teams battle. They have a top 10 power play, and they have an elite top 3 penalty kill, which was better than 85% this year, I believe. They also really need to pepper the net. The Penguins were top 5 this year in terms of shots on goal. They need all of those things to fall into place and more. They need their superstars to be their superstars. Can they survive the absence of Chris Letang on the back end? Their defensive core was already kind of weak this season, and not having Letang, that's going to be a huge issue for the Pens. Honestly, I don't see how the Rangers lose this series. I'm going to take the Rangers to win this series actually in 5 games. I think Pittsburgh can come out and kind of punch him in the mouth there. I think Pittsburgh actually wins game 1 in New York, but after that point, I think the Rangers kind of shake their heads and wake up. I think the Rangers reel off 4 consecutive wins through games 2 to 5. Rangers in 5 games is my pick for that series. Now we're going to take a look at the other division champion, the Atlantic Division champion, my Montreal Canadiens. They, of course, unfortunately drew one of the hottest teams in hockey, those being the Ottawa Senators. FYI, I'm so excited that the Senators made the playoffs. I was so happy. That franchise absolutely deserves it. And FYI, Mark Stone probably deserves the Calder. The Canadiens this season had a very solid 50-32 record, 410 points to win that division, 221 for and 189 against. The Senators, to their credit, 43 and 39 on the year for 99 points, 238 for, so they scored more goals, but 215 against. Season series between these two is actually tilted pretty heavily towards the Senators. The Senators were 3-1 against Montreal this year, outscoring the Habs 14-9. Your average game between these two teams is going to look a little something like this. Montreal only averaged 2.7 goals per game this season, sort of the same average as Pittsburgh, while the Senators actually averaged 2.9, almost cracking that 3-goal-a-game threshold that kind of separates those elite teams. So Ottawa absolutely has the better offense here between these two teams. Ottawa only allowed 2.62 goals per game against on the season, but Montreal had a phenomenal 2.3, only allowing 2.3 goals against per game on the season. What this averages out to is actually only about a 6/100ths of a goal average in favor of Montreal. In Montreal, the Habs were 26 and 15 this year, pretty good home record, while Ottawa was, like Pittsburgh actually, a sub-500 team on the road this year, only 20 and 21. Ottawa was 23 and 18 on home ice this year. Montreal just a little bit better on the road at 24 and 17. Biggest X factor I see here for Montreal, aside from the health of Max Pacioretty, which is probably the single determining factor in this, aside, of course, from the play of Carey Price. Price needs to be good. Price needs to be great, as a matter of fact, because I think this is going to be a really competitive series. Montreal must also dominate the puck control game. Montreal was a top 5 face-off percentage winning team this year, number 4 in the league, I believe, just over 52%. Ottawa only ranked in at number 24 in this category, barely winning over 48% of their draws. Montreal needs to dominate puck control, and in order to dominate puck control, they need to win those face-offs 54, 55, 56%, maybe even higher. If Montreal controls the puck, Montreal controls the game. Biggest X factor for the Senators has been the Senators' biggest X factor for the last 22 games, and that is, of course, the Hamburglar Andrew Hammond. I mean, everybody's talking about him, but with good reason. I mean, it was an unprecedented thing that he did and that the Senators did. No team in NHL history did what the Senators did this season, coming back from 14 points out to win a playoff spot. So it's whether or not the Hamburglar is going to show up in the playoffs, because this is a 100% untested Senators team in the playoffs. Is there anyone on this team that has playoff experience aside from maybe Craig Anderson? Does Craig Anderson have playoff experience? I can't tell right off the top of my head. So this is a team that has very little, if any, experience at this level. Andrew Hammond is probably going to be the Senators' single most important player in this series. If he falters, Sens are going to have a hard go of things. I think this is going to be the most exciting series in the Eastern Conference. In a series that goes to 7 games, I can't go against my team. I can't go against Montreal. They were so close last year, and the Price injury had nothing to do with it because Tokarski played out of his mind in the playoffs last year. They were so close last year, and I think that's something that's going to be built upon with or without Pacioretty for the first couple of games. I think Montreal's going to be able to get it done here, but Ottawa's going to put up a hell of a fight, let me tell you. This series, I think, is going to 7 games. I'm going to take Montreal. I think they split the first 4 games, even Stevens. It's going to be 2-2 after the first 4 games, and then I think it becomes a home team series. I think Montreal wins 5, Ottawa wins 6, Montreal wins Game 7 on home ice. Montreal is a team that is built to win those 2-1 games. They've been preaching that since the beginning of the season. They're built to win those 2-1 games. Those are the games that they're going to have to win in this series, because Andrew Hammond, I think, is going to play out of his mind. So that's what I think Montreal's going to have to do. That's what I think they're going to do. Montreal in 7, that's the pick. Now let's move into those 2 versus 3 matchups in the Atlantic and Metropolitan Division. Let's start with the one in the Atlantic. The 2 versus 3 matchup is the Tampa Bay Lightning playing host to the Detroit Red Wings. Tampa Bay on the season, 50 and 32, same mark as Montreal. Only got 108 points out of those 50 wins, 262 for and 211 against. The Detroit Red Wings were 43 and 39 on the season for 100 points even, scoring 235 and giving up 221. Season series between these two teams, Tampa Bay won 3 of the 4 games head-to-head, 3-1 against on the season, outscoring Detroit only 12-9, so these were very close games. Average game between these two teams is going to look something like this. Tampa Bay averaged 3.2 goals per game this year. That's a fantastic mark. That's really high level there. Detroit, to their credit, averaged 2.87, which is actually better than a couple of the other teams in the playoffs that we've talked about so far. Detroit gave up 2.7 goals against per game. Tampa Bay only 2.57. What this ends up saying is it's about a 0.2 to 0.25 goals per game advantage for the Lightning. Tampa Bay had a league best home record this year, 32-9 on home ice. They were nearly unbeatable this season. Fantastic. Detroit barely scraping by an above 500 record on the road this year at 21-20. In Detroit, the Red Wings were 22-19 on home ice this year, so a bit over 500 there. Tampa Bay, despite having the best home record in the league, sports the worst road record of the teams that made the playoffs. Tampa Bay was only 18-23 away from Tampa Bay this year, and that, I think, is going to play a role in this series. Your X factor here for Tampa Bay is exactly that. I mean, they only lost 9 of 41 home games this year, but they were 5 games under 500 on the road. So can Detroit beat Tampa Bay multiple times in Tampa Bay when Tampa Bay only lost 9 games at home all year? That is going to be a big question mark there. It's a huge advantage when Tampa Bay is in Tampa Bay, but it's quite a detriment when they're away from home. Biggest X factor I see here for Detroit, other than the goaltending situation, because there is a question mark there about whether Howard or Mrazek is going to kind of get the call for this series. I personally think it should be Howard just based on track record, but that's just me. You got these players on Detroit like Datsuk and Zetterberg who are still high-level players, but they're also aging players. They're aging superstars, as a matter of fact. But do these guys have one more run kind of left in them? Detroit's window, I'm sure pretty much everybody can say, is basically closing until some of these young superstars kind of take that next step forward in their career. So for the next 2 to 3 years, Detroit may not be this good, may not have this opportunity again. So do these guys like Datsuk and Zetterberg, who can still be elite talents, do they have one more run left in them? Honestly, given the way that Tampa Bay has played on the road this year, I've heard some whispers that there might be an upset in this series. I don't quite think that's going to happen. I like the Bolts here. The Bolts, I think, have just been too good a team all season, really pushing Montreal for that Atlantic Division crown. I think they've been too good all season to lose in the first round. However, I do think this series is going to 7 games. I'm going to take Tampa Bay in 7. I think Tampa Bay wins the first 2 games on home ice. I think they split 3 and 4 in Detroit, so Tampa's got a 3-1 lead. I think Detroit beats Tampa in Game 5 in Tampa. I think Detroit beats Tampa in Game 6 in Detroit, but Game 7, home ice for Tampa Bay. They've been too good on home ice all season. I think Tampa Bay wins Game 7 at home to win the series in 7 games. Tampa Bay in 7, that's the pick. And our final matchup in the Eastern Conference, the 2 versus 3 matchup in the Metropolitan Division. We are looking at the Washington Capitals playing host to the New York Islanders, who led this division for a lot of the season until the Rangers really came on at the end. So the Capitals, 45-37 this season for 101 points, 242 goals for, 203 goals against. The New York Islanders, 47-35 on the season, so a couple games better, 101 points, 252 for, but 230 against. Season series here was relatively even, but it's worth noting that the Capitals did not lose to the Islanders in regulation all season. Washington was 2-0-2 against the Islanders this year, but the scoring was only 13-11 in favor of Washington, so it was a very close season series. Average game between these two teams is going to look a little something like this. As we mentioned, the Islanders actually outscored Washington this season. In an average game, it's 3.07 to 2.95. Where the difference really comes between these two teams is in the goals against category. While the Islanders gave up 2.8 goals against per game, the Capitals gave up less than 2.5 at 2.48. What this all averages out to is about a tenth of a goal advantage per game for the Capitals. Both of these teams on the road, the Islanders and the Capitals, were 22-19 in their records, so relatively average on the road, but anytime you can win more games on the road than you lose, it's always a good thing. In Washington, the Capitals were 23-18 this year, while in New York, the Islanders 2 games better each way at 25-16. Biggest X factor I see here for the Capitals, they need to control the special teams game. The Capitals have the best power play in the league this year, but their penalty kill only ranked 14th, so we're looking at middle of the pack. Now, yes, the Islanders' power play was only ranked 16th in the league this year, so it's not exactly dangerous, but if Washington gets undisciplined and they have to start leaning on that penalty kill more and more, they could get themselves into trouble. Biggest X factor here for the Islanders, the fact that all season they've been comeback kids. They really don't worry if the first goal gets scored against on them. The Isles actually led the league this year with a .545 win percentage when they started the game trailing, when they gave up the first goal. So in games that they gave up the first goal, they ended up winning almost 55% of those games. So they really did not panic when they give up the first goal. I think they're going to give up the first goal in a couple of games in this series, but it's good to know that if that happens, this team doesn't panic. The Islanders have been one of the best stories in the league this year, I think, kind of coming out of not nowhere, but I think they've just played much better than the people expected them to play, and it's a team that's only on the rise at this point. Yaroslav Halak is going to have to come up big in this series, especially facing off with Braden Holtby, who I think is arguably a better goaltender than Halak is. But I like the Islanders in this series. I actually like the Islanders to pull the quote-unquote upset, if you can really call this an upset, with teams that had the exact same number of points. But I'm going to take the Islanders here as the Met 3 team to beat Washington, who is the Met 2. I'm going to take the Islanders in 6 games. I think they split the first 2 games 1-1. I think the Islanders win games 3 and 4 in New York. Washington wins Game 5 at home, and then the Islanders close out the series on home ice in Game 6. I will take the Islanders in 6 games. That's the pick. So that's going to be it for the Eastern Conference, folks. Thank you very much for watching this video, and move on over to the Western Conference video to hear the rest of my predictions and a wrap-up at the end. See you in a minute.